in flights, between the hum of the engines and the dim blue cabin lights. I draw cities from memory, or perhaps from longing. By the time I stepped into Rome, the air held a faint chill, it smelled of dust and espresso. I carry a sketchbook everywhere. It weighs more than my common sense. I draw to convince myself that noticing things makes them matter. Back home, a friend looks after him, young handsome Buzo. 15 years old, he is always judging me. Often the sketches are terrible, but the act of drawing steadies me. It helps me pay attention. Not like a photograph, that captures the image, but not the soul. The Colosseum stood exactly like the postcards promised. I looked at it, and felt absolutely nothing. Some places are so famous, that they leave no space for feeling. So I walked without a map past ruins, past voices, listening for something quieter. Then, I found the alley. Some say Caesar died somewhere near here. The place was barely marked, history had moved on. One cat sat watching everything. Its fur the same color as the stones, perfect camouflage. For surviving history. I sketched it, not because it was beautiful, but because it was alive, in a place that had forgotten itself. If this was where Caesar fell, there was no monument to confirm it. No marble, no triumph. Only stone. The story says it was politics. A republic defending itself from an emperor. A dictator. 23 wounds, they say. Not enough to change human nature, but enough to change the course of history. Brutus told the people, not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. Rome believed him. But history remembers another voice. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Rome listened again. People come for the story, but the truth of a place lives in the quiet moments. After everyone leaves, the stones remain. The arguments remain longer. In time, Rome found a different language, not the language of humans, but the language of God, and so the story moved from the forum to the ceiling. It was late morning when I reached the Vatican. A line of tourists and people moved like school children afraid of doing something wrong. When we entered the Sistine Chapel, the first instinct of everyone was to look up, phones lifted, necks arched, and 100 faces tilted upward in choreographed adoration, as if reverence had a manual. I didn't look up first, I looked at them. Their open mouths, the collective gasp, the unguarded awe, it was the only honest thing in the room. When I finally raised my head, it was like entering a store made of color. Flesh, cloud, muscle, a universe of gesture. The space between God's hand and Adam's, that thin strip of absence, felt more alive than the touch itself. A silence charged with possibility, then the noise began to press in. The constant shuffle of feet. The warnings from guards, the clicks of cameras. It was a room designed for worship, now drowning in the sound of documentation. A priest began to speak near the far wall. People turned toward him as though he were part of the attraction. I stood still, wanting to listen, to sense if his voice would energize the room's moral frequency. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the chapel. To measure the soul is to know the will of God, he announced. To judge the deeds of men is to keep the balance of heaven. None escapes the ledger. It was the word ledger that caught me, dragging me back to the argument I'd been having with myself for 40 years. My problem with God was never doubt. I have a huge problem with his definition as both supreme being and moral custodian, judge, jury, and arbiter of reward and punishment. A celestial ledger for all creation. I turned the words over in my mind like a coin I couldn't afford to throw into the Trevi fountain. Morality is ours, a human scaffold. The cosmos hums to something older. Indifferent. Did he ever think that maybe God wasn't judging at all? He was just resonance and alignment, vibrating through the universe. Time to keep my mouth and brain shut, and my opinions to myself. I flew home after Rome, dragging my carry-on like it had a personal vendetta against me. Buzo was there, as usual, judging my arrival. I could almost hear him thinking, "So you went to Rome to look at painted ceilings and now you're here. What did it do for you?" After the Sistine, I felt the itch that Rome could not scratch. I needed to see the land that had argued about these things for thousands of years, where the idea of ultimate consciousness wasn't moral, but eternal, untouchable beyond reward or punishment. India. My neighbor, Martha, again promised to stay at the house and manage his routine. So, I left him behind again, with a few sketches to remind him of myself. Somewhere above the clouds, I held a pencil. The Vatican lingered behind my eyes, the scorekeeping. The tiny gap between God's hand and Adam's. Would the ancient quiet of India finally settle the argument of judgment, or just offer a new kind of waiting? Either way, I would sketch. I came to Thanjavur because of a quiet claim that somewhere here, someone had tried to carve eternity into stone. In the distance, the temple tower rose above the town. I didn't admire it. I simply noted that it existed. I considered sketching him, then decided against it. His movement was already complete. Nandi waited at the entrance to the inner courtyard. A bull made entirely of patience. Pilgrims leaned close to him, as if seeking some response. There was none. I waited for him to blink, or flick a tail, or show the smallest sign of life. He just was still, waiting. I stood beside him for a long time. The chants from the sanctum moved through the air. I had the strange feeling that someone, eventually would explain the waiting. I just didn't know if it would be in words or in silence. He noticed the sketchbook before he noticed me. A small smile crossed his face. The kind given to someone who has arrived without quite knowing why. I told him about Rome. About standing beneath the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I told him I had come here because I had heard that somewhere in India, the divine was imagined differently. Draw him, he said, then he added something that disturbed the simplicity of the task. But not as a bull. I looked again, nothing about the statue had changed. Yet something inside the stone had softened. Not patience, but a kind of unbearable gentleness. I tried to draw what he meant, not decoration, not devotion, just presence. The tension between what is and what reaches toward it.
हमारे उपनिषद ईश्वर को ब्रह्मांड की चेतना के रूप में बताते हैं। हम इसे ब्रह्मा कहते हैं।
Then something began to trouble the drawing. One part of me still reached, as it had in Rome. The other refused to move. And between them, nothing. I stopped trying to draw him. Instead, I just tried to sit with him, and it was then that the realization came to me. He had not been waiting for God, he had been waiting for me. Rome left me thinking about power. In the Vatican I wondered whether that gap between the fingers in the creation of Adam was simply the distance between belief and certainty. In Thanjavur a priest spoke of resonance. The universe not as judgment, but vibration. Power, creation, resonance. 5 centuries ago, a restless seeker drew a man inside a circle and asked the question directly. Who are we? So, I have come to Florence. Puzo was there, judging my return with a patience I both envied and resented. A furry exam proctor, observing the clutter of my foreign memories. He had become a gauge for my restlessness, a reminder that attention, not movement, was what mattered. I came to see a notebook. The librarian handed me gloves. No photography, she said. Just your eyes. Anatomy studies, water vortices, all drawn in that left-handed secret whispered backward. Between the diagrams were faint smears, the noise within the perfection. He was alive in these mistakes. There was life there, not divine, just life in its raw electric form. Imperfection, alive. I began to copy his drawings, not to reproduce them, but to feel what it was like to move as he did. I thought about ceilings, bulls, and hands, the many ways humans try to touch what they cannot name. In my sketchbook, I marked a gesture. Resonance is not agreement. It is recognition. Leonardo did not build temples. He left behind notebooks, pages full of questions, measurements, experiments, and mistakes. He was not trying to perfect the human body. He was trying to understand it. Perhaps that is the difference. Our demands perfection. Inquiry accepts imperfection. After Rome, the Vatican, Thanjavur, and Florence, I came home with more questions than answers. The house remained indifferent to the scale of the journey. Puzo came and lay by the door. He looked older than when I had left. Recognition came quickly. He could only offer me his paw. Unlike Adam and God, we connected. Rome, the Sistine Chapel, Thanjavur, Florence. 4 places searching for permanence. For a moment he looked straight at me, clear, present. Then the rhythm faltered, paused, and stopped. I called his name, waited, called it again. I called every name I had ever used for him. None of them reached him. He had waited for me to come back before he died. I stayed beside him through the night. He had waited for me. He would not sleep alone in his last night on earth. I am sorry, Puzo, I should have spent more time with you. Please forgive me. Just sit here with me for a bit, please. Philosophy is easy when there is no emotion. You can sit in Rome and discuss power, stand beneath the Sistine ceiling and talk about creation, measure perfection in Leonardo's lines. But grief has no patience for ideas. In the end, philosophy falls silent, and all that remains is absence. For years I believed philosophy was about answers. Arguments arranged carefully enough to explain the world. But grief has no interest in arguments. It clears the room of them. What remains is simpler. A life shared, a routine built quietly over years. And when one of them stops, the universe does not change, but the world you lived in does.